All right, guys, we just finished up talking about cell respiration. That's what that worksheet was about that you just did, cell respiration. Remember the whole point. I know there were a lot of details on that sheet, but the whole point is what's boxed in pink to make ATP. Every cell.
Write this down.
Yeah, you should already have this down. You don't have to write this down. This should already be, no need to write it. I'd rather you guys pay attention to the words and not so much the writing down. So for now, no writing. I'll let you know when you can write. Remember, the whole point of cell respiration. Every cell has to find a way to make ATP. Okay, and cell respiration is one of those ways. So who can tell me, I didn't write it on the board, but who can tell me the name of the other way ATP is made when oxygen is not available?
That's a good question.
Did I talk about that?
What's the
Yes.
question again?
Okay.
Starts with the C?
No. Starts with an F.
Oh, yes.
Fermentation.
Well, you did.
Yes.
But you didn't go into much detail.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, let's kind of recap then. Well, here's the deal. All cells, ignore this for now. Pretend this bottom thing doesn't exist. Let's just focus up here on the top. Even though they look the same, just ignore this. They're really very different processes. Okay, the process of cell respiration, like I said, the whole point is to make this stuff. Every cell needs it. Don't care what you are, bacteria, whatever. However, there's certain situations that arise where this can't be done by a cell. The cell's got to find another way, and that's what fermentation is. Now, fermentation is different. Who can tell me the two big ways that fermentation is different?
I don't even remember talking about this.
You did? Okay. At the very beginning of the chapter I did. I had, remember when I had half the board over here was cell respiration and fermentation?
I remember writing it down.
And the other half over here was photosynthesis. It was way back in the very, very beginning. See if we can see the two ways. To the beginning. Go ahead, Liz.
One is no oxygen.
Correct. One is no oxygen. In other words, fermentation, it's not around. Do you know the other one, Liz? It's the place where it takes place. Cell respiration takes place in the mitochondria. Can anybody tell me where fermentation takes place?
Chloroplast?
No.
Oh, sorry.
No. Starts with C. Kind of the
Cytoplasm.
cytoplasm. Just the goo inside the cell. Good.
I thought we were saying.
All right, we'll review fermentation. That's probably somewhere what we should do. I guess we did not go that way.
Good thing we didn't get any questions on it.
You know what? Then I'm kind of revamping. Ignore this bottom sentence. We're going to kind of talk about fermentation really briefly. Then if that's the case. Yeah, I don't think I did. Okay. My bad. It happens.
Like we wrote down the.
It's the only thing you wrote down about fermentation
A little bit.
in the...
We wrote down it.
We wrote down like the
It's in the
curves
side
and.
part.
Okay, then yes, I did forget. Yep, thank you. Good. I know exactly what I did wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm way ahead of myself. I don't want to move on to photosynthesis until I talk about fermentation. This will not take long. Fermentation.
Now we have to take more notes.
Yes, you do, but you know what? Hey, the alternative. I'm going to call it the alternative to cell respiration. In other words, I'll be honest, cell respiration is probably the preferred method of making ATP. It makes a ton of it.
What's this? Move that down a little bit.
The alternative, which means the other choice to cell respiration, the alternative. But cell respiration is preferred. I mean, we even wrote on that worksheet, we said you're probably making 32, 33, 34 molecules of ATP. That's a lot of ATP. However, some cells, some living cells, are not lucky enough to be able to perform cell respiration. All right, basically, some organisms or some cells do not live where there's oxygen. Where do you think there are some places where there is no oxygen available? Yeah, I would imagine some places down there it's very little, if not enough, to do that. Good. Volcanic vents. Believe it or not, there are actually some organisms that live in volcanic vents where there's very little oxygen. Remember, there are also, in order to do cell respiration, you need a mitochondria. Remember, the last two steps of cell respiration take place in the mitochondrion. Well, what type? Well, you can tell this. What type of cells don't have a mitochondria? I'm going to make you guys remember words. I heard it. Yes. Remember this word?
And a prokaryote has one.
Prokaryotes are, remember, those are those simple cells. Give me an example of a prokaryote. They're all over the place, bacteria. There are more bacteria than any other type of critter by far on planet Earth. They are definitely in numbers everywhere. They're crawling all over you guys right now. They're inside you, they're outside of you, they're everywhere. You're filled with them. It's a good thing. Actually, it's what makes you stinky when you sweat, because bacteria love to feed on sweat, and then they release gases and make you stink.
I just like roses all the way.
So anyway, no, bacteria are, remember, these are the prokaryotes, the real simple cells that they don't have a mitochondria, so obviously they're not able to do cell respiration. Yeah.
What if, like, well, there's this kid that he had something wrong with, like, his DNA or whatever, and he couldn't sweat, so would he have that? Like bacteria, or would they do that?
No, that if he was unable to sweat, that basically there's a disorder for that for people who have.
They have to stop every period and don't water.
To what? And see, and I don't know what that was a result. It could be because, well, within your skin, you just don't have skin cells. You have these glands that are making sweat. Chances are there's something wrong with those glands. They're not producing sweat like they should.
I hate watching
And
movies.
what that's a result of, I don't know. Yeah.
And like
I hate watching movies.
bacteria make you stink,
Has to
like,
stop the
a lot
match,
worse than
cool them down.
certain
They's ready to
people,
roll.
like,
Come on.
You know, I don't know what that's because
Just
of, I'll be
sweat.
honest. I know everybody has a kind of a slightly different body chemistry, but that I don't know if that's related to the bacteria that's living on you. All right. Fermentation. So, then again, guys, there are cells inside of our body that ferment too. So we'll get to that here in a minute. There's actually two types of fermentation. Okay, one of them, I didn't go over this then, huh?
Nope.
Oh boy. One of them's called alcoholic fermentation, and the other one's called lactic acid fermentation. Now, the first form, yes, is the one that's used to make beer and wine. So the beer and wine industry, seriously, Anheuser-Busch, all the breweries all over the nation, all the wine-making facilities, basically they hire chemists and biologists because you're performing the fermentation process over there. So, but it's also for more than just that. Basically, the bread making process is also an example of alcoholic fermentation. Just usually the alcohol that's produced always, it's when you cook something, it just burns off. So there's no alcohol kind of deal. Yeah. Anyway, here's what I do want you to know. Here's what it kind of requires. I'm spelling this wrong. Sorry. Remember this word?
Yeah.
Glycolysis.
You just wrote it.
I'm going to write it over here too. Both forms of fermentation start with the process of glycolysis. Well, we've seen that before. Where have we seen that before?
Probably today's worksheet.
There you go. Well, stop right there. It's on today's worksheet. Remember, today's worksheet was all about cellular respiration. Remember that picture was divided up into three parts. The very first part, part A, the one at the top, that was glycolysis. In other words, fermentation, the first step of fermentation is exactly the same as the first step of cell respiration. They're no different. Glycolysis. Remember what you started with. Remember you started with sugar. You started with a glucose molecule. That's exactly what you have to start with for both of these. Let me put sugar in parentheses. I want you not to lose sight or lose track that this is sugar to start this reaction. So that's the same. So I don't care what kind of organism you are. If you do cell respiration, you got to have sugar to start off with. If you're not lucky enough to be around oxygen or have a mitochondrion, you still need sugar because it's going to be the first part of this reaction as well. Now, the difference is this, and we're not going to go in much detail, but at the end of this, it's not nearly as long as the cell respiration. At the end of the process, glucose is going to be turned into something called ethyl alcohol. That is alcohol. So basically, by the way, usually it's yeast that you add to this process to make alcoholic fermentation go. So those breweries around town, yeast is pretty much one of their starting ingredients. That's the living organism. We saw that. We used that yesterday. Yeast are able to perform fermentation. They actually produce, as a waste product, ethyl alcohol. Here's the deal, though. It still makes ATP. That's the important part. There's no point of doing this process if you're not making ATP. Same over here. You're going to make ATP. However, over here with lactic acid fermentation, you're not making alcohol. In the end, you're making lactic acid, which is where it's got its name from. Beer and wine industry. Bread industry. Pretty much use a form of alcoholic fermentation. Again, those yeast are still making ATP, not very much of it. But they're just, it's a very shortened process. And if you remember the first stage of cellular respiration, glycolysis, it didn't require mitochondria and it didn't require oxygen. So it makes sense that this would be the first step. Okay, hey, by the way, I told you, cells in your body, if you guys after school, Coach, I'm sure a lot of you guys are going on to practice.
Nope.
Okay, if not, you should go home and run 5 miles.
Nope.
Same with teachers.
Hey, this would be your homework. Go out and run 5 miles, because then you could come back and say, you know what, my muscle cells just went under on fermentation.
Mine would be dead.
I would be dead.
Seriously, we breathe, obviously, guys. We breathe. We breathe in oxygen. We breathe in oxygen so that oxygen can be sent to every cell in our body so our cell can undergo cell respiration and be happy. However, if you start running and running and running and running, and you're going to start breathing hard, okay, your body's taking in more oxygen, but your body's not going to be able to keep up. Seriously, it's going to get to the point where those muscle cells are not going to get enough oxygen. Those cells have one of two options, your muscle cells. You die because they don't have oxygen, or find another way to make ATP to stay alive.
Right, that's if you run too much?
No, that's just if you run. I think you have to be actually performing about like 45 minutes or so of nonstop running, and then those cells kind of kick into
I'm gonna tell
like a
George
half hour,
about
45
that.
minutes. There's actually a certain point.
Hey, this
At
would
a certain point, your muscle cells run out of
I'm gonna
oxygen,
tell
and they shift gears and do this. Okay, so that's kind of neat. It's almost like your muscle cells, because they affect your muscle cells most, because that's what's being exerted on the most when you run. It's neat. Your cells actually have almost like a backup plan. When cell respiration and oxygen run out, they will kick into a different mode in order to still make ATP, because without ATP, a cell is toast. It's gone. It can't sustain itself. It's done. The gasoline burns, runs out, you're done.
Toast sounds good.
No. So, there you go. And then what happens is, once you stop exercising, your breathing comes back down to normal, those muscle cells will kick back into cell respiration again. Because it's more efficient, huh?
Probably you outrun fermentation. Then what do you do? Die?
Yeah, you will. You'll be a goner.
Come on.
Yeah.
Watch
You'll be a goner.
You'll be a goner. All right, guys. I think that's. You know what? That's.
It for today?
Yeah, that's it for today. I only have a couple minutes anyway, and I thank you guys
Well, I'm gonna tell George
for
that.
being awesome today.